Good evening, everyone. I'm Ankit, and you're watching the Indian Express analysis, which goes live every day at 4 p.m. on StudyIQ IQIS English channel. Now, today is 4th of April, and we are going to discuss important articles today. Now, if you look at the paper today, most of the pages are filled with just one news, that is, announcement of reciprocal tariff on across all the countries by the US President Donald Trump. So, our first two articles are related to that development only. In the first article, we'll deal in detail about how US has imposed reciprocal tariffs on almost all the trading partners of US, including India, and what are its implications not just on US economy but also on global as well as Indian economy. Now, questions or developments like these become very important from our exams perspective, and we have seen in economy particularly the questions are asked on an applied basis. So, what will happen if X decision is made or decision is made in India or in any other major economy? So, its implication becomes important. Therefore, this article we are going to discuss from GS paper 3 perspective. In the second article, it says that among tariff nations, there are places where only penguins and not humans live. So, how has actually Donald Trump imposed tariff on these locations? That becomes important. And in this regard, places which are in news becomes important. So, we'll look at all the geographies which have been imposed by US tariff, and also these weird places where humans do not live generally, but US has imposed tariff on these geographies also. In the fifth article, we'll understand that Lok Sabha has ratified or approved the imposition of precedent rule in the state of Manipur. So, in that regard, the constitutional provisions, that is Article 356, Article 365 of the Constitution becomes important from our exams perspective. How is precedent rule imposed? What are the conditions necessary? What are the consequences of precedent rule? And the recent trend and Supreme Court's observation about in what cases can you apply precedent rule. That becomes important from our exams perspective. So, we'll look into detail the process of imposition of precedent rule, how it is ratified in both of the houses of parliament, on what conditions can it be continued after some time. We'll understand all of this. Now, this development is important from polity syllabus, therefore, the relevant paper here is GS paper 2. In the fifth article, we'll be understanding the excise or excess level of fluoride that has been found in the groundwater in the city of Sonbhadra of Uttar Pradesh. So, we'll understand the consequences of excess or less fluoride in waters, what are the results of these fluoride and what are the usual effects. We'll also understand this. Now, this generally is a part of water pollution, therefore, relevant topic is GS paper 3 as pollution right from air, soil, water. These are important from environmental perspective. And in the last discussion of the day, we'll be understanding about or geographical facts about Taiwan Strait. Taiwan Strait, also known as Formosa Strait, this is the state where increased Chinese military activities actually terrifies Taiwan, and also it imposes threat to the global flow of goods and services. So, we'll understand the geographical importance of this area in our today's discussion. So, these are total 5 articles that we are going to discuss. First two are detailed one. So, please stay tuned for discussion. The notes for this session as usual will be available on my Telegram channel. This is called as ATS Live. So, you can search ATS Live on the top right hand corner of your mobile app. Alternatively, you can scan this QR code with your mobile cameras, which will take you directly to my Telegram channel. Now, Sarang, Arya, Mohit, Geeta, Augustine, Neeraj, Shushmita, Yashi, Baga, Blueberry, Suraj, Sheetal, all of you, good evening. Yes. Now, this is the article that we are going to start our today's discussion with. This is the first page of the newspaper and this is the explain section. Also, we'll take a look that other articles also have appeared in the newspaper. So, the biggest news of our today's newspaper is imposition of reciprocal tariffs by the US administration led by President Trump almost all major trading partners of US. So, this is the subject of our today's discussion. This is relevant from world trade perspective. That is a part of the economy syllabus. Right. Now, the context of this discussion is President Donald Trump celebrated Liberation Day on April the 2nd by announcing reciprocal tariffs against all major trading partners. Now, you have to understand the reason why US is imposing such kind of reciprocal tariffs, and the biggest reason is the existing trade deficit that US has with other countries. If you add all the trade deficit of US with other countries, the number stands at $1.2 trillion every year. So that means money is flowing out of US, that is $1.2 trillion to other countries, and this is the biggest source of grievance of the United States government. And based on this fact only, US government has says that I will impose tariff on all the major trading partners. But what is surprising is countries with which US even has trade surplus, even then US administration has imposed trade tariff. Now trade deficit is basically the difference between imports into US and exports out of US, and you can understand when trade remains in deficit, which means US imports more goods and services from abroad compared to it exports to other countries, right? So therefore this has a trade deficit in US, which leads to outflow of US dollars from US to other countries. Now, what is a tariff? Tariff is basically nothing. It is a custom duty which you impose on any goods which are entering your country from foreign destinations. So, it is a form of customs duty or tax that a government imposes on goods that are being imported into the country of question. Now, it is primarily imposed in India and in other countries to counter the flow of cheaper imports, because cheaper imports almost invariably damages your local economy. And how it damages your local economy, you have to understand. Customers, they might be beneficial because of this measure by cheaper imports, because they have to pay less for the goods that they are getting in their market. However, there are other consequences also, because if you are sourcing your goods for cheap from other countries, that means US domestic manufacturing firms will stand to lose out, because their items which they are manufacturing in US naturally might be expensive because of higher labor duties, higher labor payments, higher factor payments like land, etc. So all of these factors adds together, and the cost of goods manufactured in US, they are invariably more as compared to cost of goods manufactured in other countries. So therefore your consumers, if they are buying imported goods, that means goods that are manufactured in US will be less in demand, and naturally there will be low sales of the companies who are manufacturing their goods in US. Therefore their profits will also fall down, and if their profits continue to fall down for a longer period of time, you can understand this can even lead to job losses in the companies that are manufacturing goods in US. Also, as a consequence, it leads to US trade deficit, because imports become greater than imports, and it leads to outflow of the local currency into, or outflow of US dollars from US. So this is the consequences. If unchecked, cheaper imports can lead to such kind of a damages to local economy, be it US, be it any other country. Now, why did US impose tariff? The reasons is actually it wants to promote US domestic industry, because if you want to promote domestic industry, you want these industry to grow further. Also, if these industries they continue to grow, they will start employing more people, and eventually your local economic growth will increase. So this is the intention of any country to impose tariffs. Now also US wants to reduce this trade deficit. If you start importing more goods from abroad, eventually your imports will surpass the exports. So in order to reduce your imports, in order to reduce your trade deficit, US or any other country imposes such tariff. Also, by imposition of tariff, you are earning taxes on any good that is coming into your country. So eventually it helps government to raise its tax revenue, and government can use this very tax revenue which is generating from imposition of tariffs to incentivize its domestic industry, like with many other schemes. Also, it might force foreign manufacturers to set up a factory inside US, because otherwise if they are importing their goods from other countries, that means the cost of goods rises, because you have to pay higher taxes. So this will eventually reduce the demand for import goods, and hence the countries who are exporting goods to US, they will look to make these goods in US markets only. So that is why it will increase the cost of imported goods, and it will reduce their demand. So as to increase the supply and meet the supply, they start manufacturing these goods in US, and eventually it will improve the domestic economy of US. So this is what US governments want by imposition of tariffs. Now let us understand what was announced yesterday. Now there was two sets of tariff that were announced as a part of reciprocal tariffs. Now first is that a base tariff of 10% is applied on all countries indefinitely, which means irrespective of the country which has trade deficit, which has trade surplus with US, all the countries will now be required to pay 10% additional custom duty as a base tariff. Now this itself is a sharp increase from the pre-Trump 2.0 tariff that were around 2.5%. This was in effect on April the 5th, and after that the new base tariff of 10% will be applied, which is much higher than the previous tariff that were imposed by US government. Now in addition to this base tariff, another tariff that are country specific tariff have been imposed which were arrived at by the US government by estimating how much each of these countries charges on US goods and then halving it to reach the US discounted tariffs. So suppose if US has assumed that India is levying on an average 52% tariffs on goods which are imported into India by US. So US has said no, will not impose this much tariff, rather will half it and will impose country specific tariff on India, that is 26%. So this is the country specific target. So therefore what India is required to pay, that is a base tariff, and in addition to that a country specific tariff. So these are two types of tariffs that were imposed by US yesterday. Now how has US arrived at these country specific tariff? Now reciprocal tariffs, these are calculated as the tariff rate which is necessary for US to balance its bilateral trade deficit between US and each of these trading partners. For example, India, which has a trade deficit of around $46 billion annually with US. So as such, US has decided that we will impose X amount of tariff which will balance out this trade deficit, that is, it will reduce this trade deficit to zero. So this is the amount of tariff that US has arrived with, not just India but with every country, that it has decided, see, X amount of tariff I need to apply and this will balance out the trade between these two countries. So these rate of reciprocal tariffs against India is not to find what India charges, but to raise tariffs to a level that such that India's exports to US gets neutralized completely by US exports to India. So this is how US has arrived at the decision. It has considered all the measures that is imposed by a country on goods manufactured and sent to that country by US, like tariff measures, non-tariff measures, regulatory measures, so all of this. So in that regard, US has said that this is the amount of tariff that we are levying on, and you can see from here on India, it has levied the tariff of 26%, and understand. So not how much tariff it has been applied on different country, that you have to remember, just how these tariffs have been arrived at, this is what you have to remember. Now US has specifically said that in case of India, it is levying a country specific tariff of 26%, and US has also given certain reasons why it is imposing tariffs on India. US says that India has a very protectionist trade policy, which means it rises or it has raised the imports duty on many products that are exported from US into India, like products which are necessary to set up renewable energy power plants, electronic items, telecommunication equipments, all of these items which are exported from India into US, India imposes certain kind of protectionist trade regime, and this is one of the reasons that US has said that why it is implying tariff on India. Also, US is saying that India has a very weak IP enforcement rating. What is IP? It is intellectual property. Now, one of the biggest concerns of American companies, particularly the pharmaceutical companies, is that India does not allow for evergreening of patents. What is evergreening of patents? That whenever a country or a pharmaceutical company develops a new medicine, it is given a patent of 20 years. That is, using that same formula, no other company can manufacture the same medicine for 20 years. But what happens that once the tariff period or the patent period is about to end, company says that we are changing the formula, please extend our patent validity for 5 years, 10 years extra. Now India says that this evergreening of patent will not be allowed into India, and after the patent period ends, any company can manufacture the drug items using the same formula for which patent was granted. And India also says that in case of public emergencies, in case of health emergencies, we will allow for compulsory licensing. What is compulsory licensing? Suppose if a company is developing a drug which it has gotten a patent for 20 years. But India can say that a new public health emergency has arrived, so I am relaxing this patent that X and Y companies can manufacture these drugs and sell them at a cheaper rate just because of health related emergency. So this is what compulsory of licensing is. It is in a way seen as a dilution of IP regime by Western nations. So this is the concern that US government has indeed highlighted with India, that it does not allow evergreening of patents and it imposes compulsory licensing, which dilutes the IP protection to US companies in general. Also, US has highlighted that India has somewhat restricted foreign direct investment in retail industry. You might have heard that only recently, about 1 year back, Apple store opened in India. Earlier, there were dealers who were selling Apple products, but there were no actual Apple stores in India. But why this happened? Because Apple stores have been present in many countries for many years. This was because India had restricted FDI on single brand retail. So US has highlighted that these are kind of measures that India has imposed, which in a way inhibits American businesses to do business openly in India. Similarly, there are penetration or there are presence of foreign banks in India, but these presence is very thin. For example, out of total branches in India, only 0.46% of total branches in India belongs to foreign banks. And this, as per the US government, this is actually a practice which favors Indian and particularly the government owned banks in the Indian market. And similarly, there is no level playing field even in the insurance market, because even in insurance market we will see there are big government insurance companies and government directly or indirectly supports these companies and favors or disfavors the private companies. Also, the matter of agricultural sector subsidies and support which the government offers is also a matter of concern. US says that government provides subsidies in form of fertilizers, in form of cheap and free electricity, cheap and free water to farmers, which in a way reduces their overall cost of cultivation of crops. Now this disincentivizes the free and fair agricultural trade in India. Also, government offers many kind of support scheme to farmers, for example PM Kisan Yojana or even procurement of crops as MSP. So all of this, according to US government, it jeopardizes free and fair trade in agricultural commodities, and this in a way acts as both tariff and non-tariff barriers on foreign trade in agricultural goods. Also, US has said that Indian government has a policy of localized internet shutdown in case of any law and order situation. Now, the consequences of such localized shutdown is that when you impose such localized shutdown, the use of internet stops and therefore you can't order any stuff from e-commerce site, you can't use Google Pay even to pay. So this in a way deals with or disincentivizes the freedom of trade which happens over the internet. So these are all kind of grievances that the US has highlighted, that why it is imposing tariffs on India. Understand? Now also what you have to understand is how these tariff will have implications across the globe. For example, let us deal with what happens if US imposes tariff on any country, for example like China or India. So the country on which the tariff has been imposed, it has number of options that it can do. First is that it can pass on the tariff cost to the consumer. Now what will happen in that case? Suppose if earlier a good was available at $10, but now because of tariff the price of that good rises to $12. Sorry for the use of rupee. The price of that good rises to $12. So what happens when your product becomes expensive in the market? Naturally, the demand for this product will reduce. So therefore, overall sales will also reduce. So this is how it will harm the local or the foreign companies in US. Also, what you can do is dump the goods in US. That means if the earlier cost of that good was $10 and after imposition of tariff it was becoming $12, what you do is you reduce the price of that good to $7. So now even after imposition of tariff, say the price of that good becomes $9. So eventually you are selling this good for free even after imposition of tariff, which means that this might lead to low profits of the companies because they are reducing the prices of the product by way of dumping. So in a way you are achieving the same amount of sales or even more sales, but the price or the profit per good that you are making out, it has reduced and therefore it can lead to certain consequences. Also, you can reroute the trade to other locations. Suppose India has is required to pay 26% of tariff, but other geographies like Brazil, they are only required to pay 10% of tariff. So what India can do is it can send its goods to US or Brazil, and Brazil will then send Indian goods to US with minimum value addition, and the tariff will be applied on Indian goods which are routed from Brazil at a lesser rate as compared to Indian rate. So this is how even trade rerouting can work in your favor. Similarly, other option that India has, that it can also impose certain tariffs on US goods. So this is how trade wars happen. Now this is a domino effect, that if I rise if I increase the tariffs on US goods, US will again increase the tariffs on my goods. So this is a never ending cycle, and eventually both the countries will lose out on, and even the US based consumers will lose out on. Also, what India can do is it can sign a bilateral trade agreement with US saying that, see, these are the grievances that I have heard, you have listed down in our report that you have gave. So we will consider your grievances and we will try to address your grievances. So you offer us a better deal now. So this is how bilateral trade agreements happen. And also what you can do is diversification of export markets. Now what happens is that if India is sending X amount of goods to US, now if that good is becoming half now after imposition of tariff, so what India can do is the loss of trade that it has happened with US, it can compensate it with sending more goods to other locations. That means diversification of export markets, right? So this is how a country can react to it. These are the possible explanations. Country can technically reimpose tariff on US good, but this will be a never ending effect. So it will, every country will lose out on this part. So there are other options which you can do. The most logical explanation is the combination of these two options, that India sit on across the table with US, it decide how to reduce the tariff, address the concerns of other parties, and also look to diversify its export market, that rather than sending every good to US, why don't we send it to other countries so as to balance out the loss that might happen in that regard. Okay. Now let us understand what will be the likely consequences after imposition of tariff on US market. First and the most logical consequences is the higher inflation in US market. Now naturally, if any good earlier it was available for $10, after imposition of tariff the price of that good increases to $12. So this will mean that the inflation in US market is increasing because of imposition of tariff. So naturally here the consumers are expected to bear the cost of tariff, and this will eventually lead to lesser disposable income or lesser income with the US people, because they are required to spend more money on the same amount of goods and services. Also, it can lead to retaliatory tariff, which means now US goods which will be sent to other countries, if country decide to retaliate with their own tariffs, it means the demand for US goods will reduce in foreign markets, and this will eventually lead to job losses in US, because overall production in US market will reduce because of their less in demand in foreign markets. Now also there might be a disruption of supply chain. What happens if a country or if a company were manufacturing some items in US and they were required to import certain raw materials from other countries? Now if the raw materials itself become expensive, so therefore the cost of overall products that will be manufactured in US, first of all it will increase, and also it might lead to disruption of supply chain. Overall the competitiveness of US products in other markets will reduce, and eventually it will lead to less demand in foreign markets. Understand? Also what we have seen is that since yesterday, especially the stock markets or financial markets in US, they are coming down, and the reason is because of increased volatility. Now whatever happens, whenever there is an increase in policy uncertainty with respect to any government, markets do not like this. So this increase in volatility actually is a negative signal to market, and therefore the confidence of investor in the government's policy, in the growth trajectory of US will reduce, and this will overall harm the US market only. It will not benefit the US market. And out of all things, as I told you, if there will be retaliatory tariff, it will be disruption in supply chain. This will overall lead to slower economic growth in US. Why? First of all, people have less disposable income, and when they have less disposable income, overall demand for goods and services in US will reduce. And when your goods which could have been exported to other countries, they are also meeting retaliatory tariffs. So overall demand for goods and services in US, they will reduce, and this will lead to less amount of job creation and also slow down in the economic growth of the US. And this, if unchecked, it can lead to the problem of stagflation. What is stagflation? Stagflation is the combination of high inflation, slow economic growth, as well as high unemployment. So this is what happens if a economy is witnessing a stagflation, that is high inflation, less or reduced economic growth and high levels of unemployment. Understand the consequences? Any doubt on consequences in US? No, right? Now let us understand how it can affect India, because from our exams perspective, its effect on India becomes quite important, right? First is the demand of Indian exports. Now I told you, right? The first example, suppose if an Indian product was available in US market for $10, but now after imposition of tariff, the cost of this product increases to $12. So naturally, your products are becoming expensive in foreign markets. So naturally, people will tend to buy this less, and this will overall reduce your demand for products. And when the demand for products decreases in your US market, your competitiveness of products also reduces, because overall price of your products is increasing. So this is how the economic competitiveness or price competitiveness of your products in foreign markets because of imposition of tariff is reducing, and therefore demand for Indian exports is expected to reduce. Now what about the sectors which exports large amount of goods to US? These are pharmaceutical sectors, gems and jewelry, textile and apparel, engineering goods, most of them is auto components, iron and steel products. All of these sectors will witness a slowdown because US has imposed tariffs on all these products. But the most major exception is the pharmaceutical sector. So you can see the shares of pharmaceutical sector yesterday, they performed well because US has exempted pharmaceutical sector from imposition of tariff as of now. So this is the sum of articles which highlights that tariff induced global slowdown may hit Indian growth. Lower tariffs versus Asian peers may boost foreign inflows, and Indian jewelry exports to US is likely to hit hard. So I am combining all of these articles into this one slide. Okay. So growth export sectors, sectors which witness high exports to US like gems and jewelry, textile apparel, auto components which are a part of engineering goods, iron and steel products, all are expected to witness reduced demand in US, and therefore they are likely to face economic slowdown. Also, India will now have a pressure to diversify its trade with another countries, majorly to other major economies that imports high amount of Indian goods like European Union as well as China, because China has a very large captive audience. So India will be forced to diversify its product and deal with these two geographies to compensate for its loss of trade with US. Now, in also to compensate US or to reduce its trade deficit with US, India is likely to import more items from US like oil and gas products, also agricultural products. So this will lead to increase in imports of India from US market. Also, as you can understand, this article says that lower tariff versus Asian peers may boost foreign inflows. So what we have seen that major competitors of India in export markets like Vietnam, China, etc., these countries have witnessed higher tariffs as compared to Indian economy. So what can happen that when any equipment manufacturer, for example, if you are manufacturing a shoe in Vietnam and you're exporting it to US, but when that shoe will be implied a higher tariff, so the companies who are manufacturing their shoe in Vietnam, they might be looking to set up a factory in India because of less tariff in India as compared to Vietnam, right? So this can lead to supply chain recalibration, which might favor countries like India because it has a less tariff as compared to its major competitors. Similarly, Bangladesh or exports of textile products from Bangladesh is quite high into US, and US has imposed high tariff on Bangladesh as compared to India. So similarly, textile manufacturers, manufacturers of shirt, t-shirts, etc., they might also relocate to India, and hence it might advantage India. And also this will help India to fill gaps that might exist in the global supply chain. So this will overall promote the foreign institutional investment, it will promote the foreign direct investment into Indian economy. Understand? So this is how it is a mixed bag consequences for India, that in some factors like Indian exports, they might witness a slowdown, but this Apada might also provide us with an opportunity that this crisis time, it might lead to supply chain recalibration, because India's competitor in the export markets like Vietnam, like China, like Bangladesh, they have witnessed higher imposition of tariffs. So companies that are manufacturing the goods from there, they can relocate into India, and this might lead to increase in foreign investments into Indian economy. Understand? Any doubt on how tariff works? Any doubt? If you don't have any doubt, well, where is the question? I forgot to add the question. No problem. I will give that question in the next class. Now let us deal with the another article. This article also is on the explained section, and you can say among tariff nations there are islands eventually where penguins and US military live and not other humans or civilians live. Even those islands have been imposed with tariffs by the US government. So you might see there might be a very common reaction to it that bhai tu kya kar raha hai? This question will be imposed to President Trump, right? So let us see why this is a very big deal. Now the context of this article is that Donald Trump has imposed 10% tariff on imports from an island known as Heard and McDonald Island. Now what is funny about this island is that no human is believed to set foot on this island in nearly a decade. Now this island, if you can see from this map, it is located on the southwest part of Australia. So it is also controlled territory of Australia, right? Now let us understand few facts about this island. This is a volcanic island, and it is one of the 7 external territories which belongs to the country of Australia, and it is located roughly 4,100 kilometers southwest of Australia and roughly 1,600 kilometers north of Atlantic coast, right? Now this island, in terms of geographical condition, it is covered in glaciers, and it is a barren land for most part, and it is an archipelago and one of the most remote places on the planet, and it is home only to penguins, seals and seabirds. So it does not habit or there are no human beings on this particular island. So this is a funny part that you have to remember. Okay. Also, another baffling entries on this imposition of tariff list by the US government are the other Australian external territories like Cocos Island, which is also known as Keeling Island, Christmas Island and Norfolk Island. Now Norfolk Island in particular, which is located roughly 1600 kilometers northeast of Sydney here, and it is an island which has around 200 permanent inhabitants. But when asked, the administrator of this island says that they do not export any item to US. So what is the point of imposition of tariff, because you are not exporting anything to US in the first place? Another baffling entries on this list is the British Indian Ocean Territory, which comprises of Chagos Archipelago, which is a group of low-lying islands in the Indian Ocean between Maldives and Mauritius. Now this is the map of the British Indian Ocean Territory. The most important island of this is called as Diego Garcia, right? Now this Chagosian Island, the largest of the island, is known as Diego Garcia, which is home to a strategic joint military base operated by the militaries of US and UK. Now this island, it hosts approximately 4,000 American and British troops, and it is the only island in the British Indian Ocean Territory which is inhabited by the human beings. But you have to understand, these are only inhabited by the military personnel, not of these countries but of US and UK itself, and it does not have any civilian inhabitants. Understand? So this is why it was quite weird to find these kind of locations also on the list of US tariff list, that these do not inhabit any kind of people. So that is why this was a weird news that I needed to cover. Now every day I tell you that we deal with every economic aspect or every polity aspect in detail in our foundation classes, and the purpose of me telling you that, because having a very solid foundation is necessary when you are going to attempt in your UPSC examination, because you can't just get away with learning only what is called as current affairs. So current affairs, I only take up the articles which appear in the news, but what about articles that have not appeared in the news? How will you prepare them? So that is why a solid foundation is quite necessary, and we at StudyIQ, we are offering you the foundation courses, which are courses for P2I batches. Now P2I means prelims to interview. Everything will be taken care of, including study material, including classes for all the subject, including mains and prelims test series. Now the best part of this course that we are offering, the newest entry of this course is known as Diamond Batch. Now, Diamond Batch gets you many things which are not available in the Gold and Platinum Batch. For example, you will be getting a one-to-one mentorship with the faculties, not just mentors. You will be getting a full refund in case you clear prelims examination, and if you top in our monthly test, you'll be getting a financial reward of 1000 rupees. Similarly, if you are performing well in the test, and you will be brought to Delhi, and every expenses, be it food, lodging, study related expenses, will be taken care of by StudyIQ, and our goal in these courses are only to get you selected in the final list. Now, how to get admissions for the Diamond Batch, if you may ask? Click on the website, go on explore courses, but before that you have to create an account. Go on this tile, click on UPSC IS English. As soon as you click on UPSC IS English, there is a tile called as GSP2I Foundation 2026 April Evening Batch. Now, admissions for these have started and the batch itself has started, but still you can get the admission up till 7th of April. The prices of the course is expected to rise after that. Right now, the Diamond Batch here is available at 43,749 rupees, but using the code which is flashing on the bottom half of your screen, you can get even more discounts on this amount. Let me tell you how. Click on add promo code here. You are required to enter coupon code called as ATS Live. Now, as soon as you enter coupon code ATS Live, click on apply. Now, after application of ATS Live, you can see you are getting a discount of 8,749 rupees, and the value of Diamond course, which is 43,749, now it has reduced to just 34,999. Similarly, there are discounts available for Platinum and Gold courses also, but believe me, this is the best course, the validity of which is close to 32 months. Understand? So, this is available at the best possible rate right now. Do not delay your admission, but do not forget to apply the code ATS Live in order to get maximum discounts. Right? Now, let us move to another article of the day. This article talks about the ratification of precedent rule by the Lok Sabha. Now, you understand, whenever government imposes precedent rule in a particular state, that has to be ratified or approved by the parliament, that is both houses of the parliament, in certain time. What is the time limit? I'll tell you today. Now, this is a very important discussion because it deals with a very core aspect of polity, that is how you impose precedence rule, which is a part of Article 356 of the Constitution. Now, the context of this discussion is that Lok Sabha has approved this. Now, the Rajya Sabha is discussing whether to approve the precedent rule or not. Now, yesterday late night this discussion happened, so it has created a controversy, that is government is trying to overlook this kind of a ratification, which is a very important part of the Indian political system. So, in this regard, this controversy is not important from our exam. What is important is how and what are the consequences of imposition of precedent rule. Now, precedent rule is a form of state related emergency, which means there is a failure of constitutional machinery in the state, and it is more popularly known as precedence rule. Now, it is also known by other names like state emergency and constitutional emergency. However, Constitution does not use the word emergency for imposition of precedence rule, right? So, technically, if the question says that does Article 356 mention the word emergency, the answer would be incorrect. Now, there are two articles which allows the government to impose precedent rule in the state or any particular state in India. First is Article 356, which empowers the President of India to issue the proclamation of issuance of precedent rule based on a situation which might arise in a state, so that the government of a state cannot be carried on in accordance with the provision of the Constitution. Similarly, there is Article 365, which allows the Union government or the President of India to impose precedent rule if a state government fails to comply with any order which is given by the central government in relation to some parts. For example, with railway lines, with imposition of telecommunication related facts, these are the powers given to the state government, and in many cases these are, or the implementation part might be left out to state government. Now, as this is an exclusive power of central government, so it is well within the right of central government to give directions to state government. Now, in case state government fails to comply with such directions which form a very exclusive part of centre's power, this is a fair ground under which the precedent rule can be imposed under 365. Now, it is lawful for the president to hold that a situation has arisen in a state where the government cannot be carried on in accordance to the provision of Constitution. And how does President come to a conclusion that government cannot function according to the provisions of Constitution? Based on a report which is sent by the governor of a state to the president, right? So, these are the grounds based on which precedent's rule can be imposed in any part of the India. Now, what is the process of getting presidential and parliamentary approval, and what is the duration of president's rule? Now, once you have imposed the president rule in any state, you have to get it approved by both houses of the parliament within 2 months from the dates of issuance. Now, in case the parliament is not functioning, then you have to get the parliament's permission within 6 weeks of the reconstitution of parliament. Now, if approved by both houses of the parliament, the president rule will continue for a period of 6 months, and it can be extended for a maximum period of 3 years with the approval of parliament every 6 months, right? So, suppose you have gotten this approval, so the next approval that you have to take from the parliament is within the next 6 months, right? Now, both approving resolution and the continuation of the president rule can be carried out by both house or either houses of the parliament by a simple majority. That is, majority of more than 50% of members present and voting. This is enough for you to get the permission of the either house of the parliament. Understand? So, this is how government gets the resolution of president rule approved by the parliament by simple majority, that is more than 50% of members present and voting. Now, there were some changes made in the Constitution of India on what is the process of imposition of president rule, and this was made as per the 44th Amendment Act of 1978. Now, this Amendment Act says that beyond 1 year, the president rule can be extended by 6 months at a time only when two conditions are met. First is there is a proclamation of national emergency in India, then only you can extend the presidential rule in a state beyond 1 year. And also the another condition is that election commission must certify that the general elections to the legislative assembly in the concerned state where the presidential rule have been applied cannot be held on account of certain difficulties. So either of these two conditions are there, then government can extend president rule beyond 1 year, otherwise it can't continue. Understand? So this is how president's rule or the imposition of president's rule was made difficult by 44th Amendment Act in 1978. Now, what is the consequences of president rule? What happens once you impose president's rule? Now, in that case, once president's rule is in application, president acquires extraordinary power with respect to administration and control of the state government. Now, this allows the president to dismiss the state council of ministers, which is headed by the chief minister. So, state council of ministers ceases to exist after the imposition of president's rule. Now, the responsibility of governance in that particular state is now vested with state governor, who is eventually appointed by the president of India only, and he or she governs the government of that particular state on behalf of the president and with assistance of the other bureaucrats like chief secretary or any advisor that might be appointed by the president of India. So, in that case, the government of that particular state or the power of governance is vested with state governor, who acts as a nominee of president in that state, right? Now, parliament or passage of any law of the state in which the president's rule is applied, the passage of that law, the responsibility of that is vested to the Parliament of India. So, this parliament, it passes any state legislative bill and state budget. So, the responsibility of passing laws and budget of that particular state, that is vested with Parliament of India, and any law which is made by parliament or president and any other specified authority at the time when president's rule is in application, it will continue to be operative even after the end of president's rule. So, government cannot say that we need to bring another budget because the earlier budget was passed by parliament at the time of the imposition of president rule. Understand? So, this is the consequences of what happens in the president's rule. Now, what about the assembly? Is it dissolved? I will let you know. Now, president's rule, throughout the years, we have seen that earlier, whenever India got independent and in 1950 a new constitution was enacted, Indian government had a habit of imposing president's rule quite frequently. So much so that president's rule in total has been imposed 134 times across 29 states and union territories, and most frequently it has been imposed in Manipur and Uttar Pradesh at 10 times each. And since 1950, Jammu and Kashmir has spent over 12 years in total under president's rule, and Punjab has been under the president's rule for over 10 years. And you can understand the situation, as both of these states were facing the spells of militancy and separatist activity. So as to control these law and order situations, both of these two states, that is erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir and the state of Punjab, were under the president's rule for the longest duration of time, that is 12 years and 10 years respectively. However, in terms of number of times a particular state has been under president's rule, the highest is Manipur and Uttar Pradesh, that is 10 times each. Now, the most recent imposition of president rule was back in 2021. So, the newest president rule has been applied after 4 years. So, what is the reason behind it? Why has imposition of president rule now has so much reduced? Now, you will see that Puducherry also has spent over 7 years under president rule and history because of repeated government or the political instability. But the biggest question is, why has there been so much delay in imposition of president rule in recent years? And I will tell you the trend. And the reason is the Supreme Court of India, because Supreme Court of India had comprehensively examined the power to impose president's rule and its effect on center-state relations in a very famous Supreme Court judgment known as SR Bommai versus Union of India. Now, this matter actually reached the doors of Supreme Court because after several instances of central government imposing president's rule and dismissing state government at the will. Earlier, there was this practice: if Congress government came to power, it dismissed all the other party state governments, and if other parties came to power, it dismissed all the governments of the Congress related state governments, right? So, this was the recklessness that all the states have demonstrated and all the political parties have demonstrated. So, Supreme Court has to act in order to check this kind of a menace by Indian political parties. Now, this SR Bommai case was very notable because this was heard by a 9-judge bench which unanimously held that president's power to impose president's rule under Article 366 was subject to judicial review, and courts can actually examine the decision to see if it suffered from illegality, malafide intention or extraneous circumstances or even abuse of power and fraud. While Supreme Court it acknowledged that the court will not weigh in on the correctness of president's subjective decision, but it can actually consider that the report which was sent to it by the governor, whether it was having certain relevant material which allowed president to impose president's rule. So, it cannot question the decision of president, but it can question the relevance of the material based on which the president has made the decision. Also, the Supreme Court highlighted or it gave a certain guidelines which was necessary to protect the independence of state government. So, it stated that matters relating to law and order, if the law and order of a state was bad, was it a ground of imposing president's rule? No. So, it highlighted in such grounds it can't be cited as a reason to impose president's rule. Why has president's rule been imposed in Manipur? Because the existing chief minister Biren Singh, he resigned and there was no other person willing to take the responsibility of chief minister. So, in that case, there was no particular government that could be formed under a particular CM. So, that is why the president's rule was invoked, not on the basis of law and order. So, even after a valid proclamation, the court held that only the state legislature will be suspended. So, this means that with imposition of president's rule, will the state legislature be dissolved? The answer is no. It will be kept in a suspended animation and other limbs of the state government would continue to function unless the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha approves it within 2 months. So, without the approval of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, the president cannot dissolve the assembly of the state, rather it has to be kept in a suspended animation, and without this approval, the dismissed government would be revived, right? So, in case government fails to get it approved by the parliament, so Supreme Court will be in its power to revive the state government, and we have heard this before. In Uttarakhand, the government actually revived the state government because of the failure of the government to get it approved in the parliament, right? Now, Supreme Court in the SR Bommai case has highlighted that the fact under the scheme of our constitution, greater power is conferred about to center vis-a-vis state government, but it does not give central government the right that center should act as a mere appendage of the state government. So, in decades following the Supreme Court's decision in the SR Bommai case, we have seen that the instances of president's rule or its imposition have indeed decreased. That is why the last president's rule was imposed in 2021, and after a gap of 4 years only, we have seen that a president's rule has been applied in India, which was a rarity before. Understand? Now, let's see if you are able to solve this particular practice question which appeared in the prelims of the year 2017. So please let me know the correct answer. Sarang says option C. Another one. Baga, Niranjan, Shushmita, Yashi, Suraj, Achal, Kaizen, Geeta, Mohit, Augustine, Niranjan, Arya. Which are not necessarily the consequences of proclamation of President's rule in a state. C. Well, removal of Council of Ministers in the state, this sure happens, because I have told you the first order of business that you remove the Council of Ministers of the state, you remove the Chief Minister and the head of the government becomes governor, right? So this sure happens. Now what about dissolution of State Legislative Assembly? It is incorrect, because I told you suspension happens. So you can say dissolution sure does not obviously happens. It might happen, but it won't for sure happen, right? Now dissolution of local bodies, it does not happen in any case. We have understand that legacy or continuation of local bodies, it has to do nothing with imposition of the President's rule, right? So we have to understand what does not necessarily happen. This means in our today's discussion 1 and 3 is correct, 2 is not, because it sure happens, right? So 1 and 3, option B is the right answer. Okay, so that is how you make sure to reread the question again, so you know what is asked by the paper setter, right? You don't have to give your answer, you have to give the answer asked for you, right? So option B is right answer. Now let us move to this next article. This actually appeared in yesterday's newspaper, but because of lack of time I was unable to deal with it. So I thought, why not cover it today? It will be a very positive change from the usual economy and polity related articles, right? Now this article appeared because it states that the second largest district in UP, Sonbhadra, is facing a big problem related to the contamination of fluoride in the drinking water, and the reason given for it is that granite rocks which are found in this region, they naturally release fluoride into water, and since most villagers they rely on borewells and hand pumps for drinking water, they are unknowingly consuming high levels of fluoride. So this is the reason for fluoride contamination. So let us understand what is fluoride in the first place. Now fluoride is a naturally occurring mineral which is found in soil, water, plants and rocks. Now the chemical nature of this compound, that in its ionic form of fluorine, it is a very highly reactive element, so it interacts with other elements quite easily. Now the sources of fluoride is natural, it can be present in groundwater or even in volcanic emissions, and it can also be artificial, which is added to water supplies, dental products like toothpaste and pharmaceutical products also. So sources of fluoride can be both natural as well as artificial. Now uses of fluoride, we have seen the most popular use case of fluoride is relating to dental health, that it strengthens tooth enamel and it reduces cavities. So that is why you will see that many popular toothpastes in India and other parts of the globe, they are having fluoride also. Also it has industrial application, that it is used in manufacturing of metals like aluminum and also relating to pesticides and refrigerants, whereas in public health it is added to drinking water to reduce dental decay, known as water fluoridation. Understand? So similar to chlorination, fluoride is also added to water. Now there are also health concerns related to fluoride. First is dental fluorosis, that in case of overexposure to fluoride during childhood, it can lead to white spots or streaks on teeth. So that is why some toothpaste makers, like a famous Baba, he says that his toothpaste has a very less amount of fluoride which is not present in other toothpaste, right? Similarly, skeletal fluorosis, it leads to prolonged high fluoride intake which can cause joint pain, stiffness and damages to bones. So excess fluoride is bad and even lack of fluoride is bad. So that means you need fluoride in moderate amounts. Now there is also a problem called as neurotoxicity, which means high levels of fluoride exposure, it may impair your cognitive development in children, and also thyroid function, that excess fluoride affects your thyroid's functionality. Understand? So these are the health concerns which might lead to overexposure of fluorosis or fluoride. Now, what is the state of fluoride contamination in India? Now, permissible limit is set by the regulatory authorities. For example, Bureau of Indian Standard, it says that between 1 to 1.5 milligram per liter, it is believed that the levels of fluoride above or below this level could cause dental delay. So this is allowed in moderate quantities as per BIS, whereas WHO states that you are required to have 1.5 milligram of fluoride per liter of water. Understand? So there are different sets of fluoride prescription by BIS and WHO. Now fluoride levels exceeding the permissible limits have been detected in isolated pockets across 370 districts in 23 states in India. Rajasthan, Andhra, Telangana, Tamil Nadu, Gujarat and West Bengal are relative states where high fluoride contamination has been found in India. So this is the facts that you need to know about fluoride pollution. Now let's see if you are able to solve this question. Consider the following statements relating to fluoride. Fluoride in its ionic form of fluorine, and it is found naturally in the groundwater and volcanic emissions. Excessive fluoride intake can lead to both dental and skeletal fluorosis. The BIS and the WHO have set the same permissible limit for fluoride drinking or limit of fluoride in drinking water. Well, third you can safely say is incorrect. BIS has 1 to 1.5 milligram, WHO says 1.5 milligram. So these are indeed different levels. First and second are correct. So therefore, option A is the right answer to this question. All of you this time have gotten it correct. Now moving to the last article of the day, I have taken it from the website, and you can say this web article from the Indian Express states that Taiwan says 76 Chinese warplanes were detected as China has launched a surprise deal known as Strait Thunder. Now what happens quite frequently is that China has a practice of intimidating its rival countries, more so the country of Taiwan. Now this is the region that we are talking about today, that is the Taiwan Strait, which is the water body which is located between mainland China and Taiwan, right? Now this is located north of South China Sea and south of East China Sea, and you can see there are other sea which are far away, that is Yellow Sea, Sea of Japan. We are dealing with the matter related here. Okay, this is the strait of in question. Now China has a habit of intimidating other countries. For example, it will send its warships to the region, it will send warplanes to the region just to threaten the other countries from being intimidated. Now recently China completed a 2-day military drill which was codenamed as Strait Thunder 2025A in the middle and southern parts of Taiwan Strait, that is in this particular region. Now military exercises by China has come in a backdrop of visit of US Defense Secretary who is on an official visit to Asia. Now let us understand some of the details about the Taiwan Strait. This Taiwan Strait is also known as Strait of Formosa. Now you can understand it is located north of South China Sea and south of East China Sea, and to the east of Taiwan Strait is located as Philippine Sea. You can see this diagram correctly? Okay. Now the location of this is that China has Fujian province towards the west, and towards the east of the strait there is a country called Taiwan. It is a 110-mile wide waterway which separates mainland China from Taiwan, and the strategic and economic importance of this water body is that 1/3 of world's shipping traffic it passes through this strait. So therefore countries like US, countries like India, countries like Australia, they are looking to protect these Taiwan Strait so that China does not commit aggression on Taiwan and this water body remains open without any kind of disturbances. Now this water body connects South China Sea and the East China Sea, and the rivers draining into it are Zhuilong and Ming, whereas major ports of Taiwan which are located on the Taiwan Strait, also known as Formosa Strait, are Kaohsiung, Angping, Keelang and Suao. Understand? Now there was this question that appeared in 2014 that Turkey is located between which water bodies. Similarly, I have changed this question. Taiwan is located between which water bodies? You have to apply your brain in solving this question. Please let me know quickly. Sarang says option C. Anyone else? Yes, all of you are right. Option C is the correct answer. Now the notes for this session will be available on my Telegram channel ATS Live, and this is your practice question which is another PYQ of 2018. So let me know the correct answer in the comment section. This is the place where I will make the notes available. So this is all from my side for today. I'll see you again tomorrow at 4 PM sharp. Until then, please revise. Please make sure to revise all the important articles and make sure to read the newspapers also. So I'll see you again. Have a very good evening.